Hello, I'm Charles Mallet with a UK column interview, and today I'm joined by Dr. Sam Bailey, who has received a demand for 148,000 New Zealand dollars by a disciplinary tribunal. Sam, thank you very much for joining me, and a very warm welcome to UK column.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Not at all. Now, as I alluded to, you have quite a well, let's say, challenge ahead of you in many regards. But I think what I'd like to do is just step back from that. There's going to be a lot to get through, but let's start with a bit of background and on the medical side of it, the career side of it. Just describe to me what your medical practice, what your life was like prior to 2020 and your voyage into the public eye, let's say.
Yes, well, I was trained conventionally so I went to Otago University in New Zealand and I worked in various different specialties. So, general practice, emergency medicine, sexual health, and clinical trials. I spent quite a long time with new drugs, and I was the research physician, like one of the lead physicians looking after the patients. So seeing people and looking after them while they're trialing new drugs. And I was always probably quite orthodox and conventional. I did everything by the book. Patients tended to like me a lot, and I never had a patient complaint. And I started to get a little bit disgruntled with medicine, the work a few years before 2020, where I got frustrated with the problems with trying to get treatments to people. So I started my own online doctor business, which was the first of its kind in New Zealand. And before that kind of became normal. And as a consequence of that, I was sort of headhunted for a TV show to be a health presenter for that. And I never thought you could do that as a doctor. And I loved it. I really loved doing presenting. And so I did a series for the main network in New Zealand. And then one of my very good friends uh, suggested to me that I should start my own YouTube channel because of doing this presenting. And I thought, oh, really? Like people would want to watch a doctor. And she said, yeah, 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 do that. You'd be really good at it. So, and about halfway through 2019, I sort of started a channel, but it was mostly focused on my business that I had at that time. And then at the end of that year, I burnt myself out with this business, and then I decided I'm just going to go back into the work that I was doing, and just do these YouTube videos on the side. And so I did that really, and then yeah, 2020 happened, and uh, so yeah, do you want me to continue with 2020?
Well, I tell you what, just before we do get into that, because I think it's fascinating that it was that way round in that you were very much in the public eye and you therefore had gone to YouTube as well, which I'm sure we might be able to talk about a little bit later. But I think given what's happened, um, before or during perhaps your time speaking as a doctor on television, was there any relationship there with the Medical Council of New Zealand as to sort of what you should or shouldn't do? I mean, in terms of the messaging, were you given pressure or direction from anywhere as to how to conduct yourself?
No, not at all. So it was a scripted TV show. So it was based on a British TV show actually called, I'm just trying to think of it. It's a doctor one. Sorry, it's left me. It will come to me later. That Michael Molesley was on that TV show. So that was what it was very much. I was one of four presenters, and because it was scripted, you couldn't go off piste at all. Like it was, you said what you were supposed to say, and they taught me how to do presenting, really. I didn't know how to do any of that first until I did that TV show. And they got me back for a second season, and I was halfway through filming that in 2020 when everything went wrong.
Wow. Okay, but so that's fascinating. Looking back then, to the fact that it was scripted and whatever, and now viewing public health in the way that you do, how do you sort of consider what it is that you were being asked to do and say?
Yeah, there's a lot of forgiveness of you have to do of yourself, of the things that I once believed in. And I think I think about this on lots of different areas. So it crosses over into vaccination and in areas that I just assumed everything that I was taught was correct and I never questioned it and I never looked at it myself. And it was actually funny because when I started the YouTube channel in particular, people would write in and ask me questions and I had a bit of hubris. I thought that I knew everything. And then I realized the questions they're asking me, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm way out of my depth here. I don't know. And the public are really well educated. And it humbled me to think actually, what I once knew was wrong. And I don't take anything for granted now. So that's what I focus, myself and my husband, Mark, we focus on extensive research before we'll make a comment on anything. So yeah, I feel a little bit ashamed of what I was like, but you have to forgive yourself for that.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's very candid. I think really, I was sort of considering it from the other side of it, as in you were being used as a mouthpiece, as a trusted voice. I mean, so rather than considering your own part in it, I was wondering also what you think about those that were using you in effect as a messaging tool.
Definitely. That's totally what it was. And I was the most popular of the presenters. I knew that. They told me that. They gave me that feedback. And yeah, I didn't, I liked the idea of being on TV and that sort of thing. And, initially you feel really flattered by it, but they do use you for their own purposes. And now I look back at what the kind of subjects were, and they were clearly came top down of these are the talking points that we need the public to be aware of. And yeah, and I was very naive to that.
And so, with that in mind, well, also you've referred your husband Mark, again, medically trained. Um, when the initial reporting was coming out, sort of end of 2019, about, yet another scary and mysterious illness from China, there was obviously a very much an echo to things that we'd heard previously over the last couple of decades. If you can recall, what did you think at that point, and what were you talking about with Mark and those around you?
Yeah, so obviously we at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we were paying attention to this, but a lot of it we thought, oh, this sounds like nothing, like that nothing's going to come of it really. And then as the media hype really intensified, and this is at the stage I'm getting quite a few questions from my audience asking me to talk about coronavirus. And I only had a really small channel at this point. And I thought, oh, I felt a bit uncomfortable with it because I didn't know. And I thought I don't really want to report on this until I know more. And Mark was heavily behind me doing the research, or both of us were at that stage, trying to put the pieces together. And I think the overwhelming feeling was, and I'm sure you and your audience would identify with this, was that the messaging that we were getting on the media didn't have any semblance of what was happening in reality. Like you could look outside and think, this looks completely normal, like everything's fine, but why are they saying all this? And that it was that mismatch of information that really set us off on looking into it. And particularly, I had no interest in virology and viruses. I'll be perfectly honest. It's a very dry, boring subject. And I never thought that that would be something that we would end up diving into so deeply. But it is what happened because we had to understand for ourselves. And I think we looked initially at the WHO information and realized this doesn't add up. The people that are dying are elderly at their time of life, end of life. This is real. There's big problems here, and then obviously dived right into the the research.
And I mean, the audience, obviously, UK column audience is predominantly based in the UK, but we do have a very wide base all over the world, and everybody will identify. Anyone certainly listening to this will identify exactly with what you're saying. To what extent in New Zealand, a country that I think from the outside looked like it had an incredibly harsh regime imposed, to what extent was that telegraphed, did it seem like it was going to go bananas, or did that come as a enormous surprise?
They really tested the population quite a lot with I think the media in itself was very critical of like they really like Jacinda Ardern was framed as this kind of savior in a way. And so she was coming off, she was still very popular because of other things that had happened over the previous years. And so I think the fear was ramped up massively, and the population were like putty in the hands of the authorities. And, you know, extremely, they just went along with it all. And yeah, it was extremely authoritarian. Mark and I didn't go along with any of it from the beginning because we thought it was wrong and had no basis. And, you know, these ideas of mandates and things, obviously, these are agreements, and we never went on into that. But you realize too how um, politicians were portrayed overseas, like over the time Jacinda became more and more unpopular. But overseas, she was still portrayed as this amazing person and was doing all these wonderful things. But it was, I mean, even we had those extreme MIQ quarantine rules where it was basically like coming into a prison if you were coming back into the country as a New Zealander and you would be in these quarantine situations. And I mean, looking back now, there's no way they could get away with it now. But at that time, I think the population was incredibly fearful of what this thing was.
I think that's it. I think again, really wherever anyone was, the response was just so surprising that people were almost exclusively caught off guard. Now, for the majority of us, without any skin in the game, as it were, with no medical training, no medical professional links, whether or not to, as you say, go along with it was a different decision for you to decide to not go along with it or to speak out is a of a altogether different order of magnitude. Just describe how it was that you did make that decision to become active and to speak out and therefore to put your reputation, as it were, on the line.
Yeah, I guess so. In early 2020, we were getting these requests and people were asking, and I thought, okay, I'll just say what I think and say that this is my opinion. And because I, maybe it's my naive personality, but that's what I'm like. I just think, oh, I'll just say what I think. And, you know, I didn't know. I had no idea what was coming. But we found this book, Virus Mania, which was critical for Mark and I. Mark found it first, and it was about the history of virology, of the different pandemics that have happened before, and how you could see what was playing out real time. And that caused a paradigm shift in my thinking and Mark's thinking. And a lot of the themes of my videos then became focused on this Virus Mania book because I found it so the shift of losing fear and about what pandemics were and not being scared. So and again, this was not sort of intentional. I had no idea what was playing out because I was still working at this point as a doctor in clinical trials. I had my, you know, bread and butter, as it were. And but my videos are really popular. So I did one on social distancing, and I think it got over 600,000 views on YouTube. And I didn't, you know, it was really surprising to me, and people would get very angry in the comments. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to play along with this. I'm just going to carry on, see what happens. But it was really September 2020 that it was my crossing of the Rubicon, where I made a video, and I consciously did this, where I knew that there was in New Zealand at that time, it was just before the elections were happening, and a lady that I knew was running a PCR clinic in my hometown, Christchurch. And she told me that they'd shut it down for several months before, and that now the Ministry of Health were pumping all this money in. And I knew when they did that, that the testing would go up and therefore the cases would go up and the fear. And so I made a video about that. And as a side issue, I kind of said, I won't have a coronavirus vaccine if and when it comes about. And I thought, I'm saying this is my opinion. And I specifically said, I'm not telling you what to do. You've got to make your own decision up, but this is what I'm doing. And then I had a phone call from the TV show, from the lawyer, saying, take down your video. And I was sort of just so affronted. I was like, what? What do they think? They're not the editor of my YouTube channel. I can go and get stuffed. And so I said, no. And they said, well, take out the bit on vaccines. And I knew then what this was all about. And this happened, and you realize how planned these things are because that happened. Then I had an email from the medical council saying I'd had all these complaints about this video. There was smear articles from AFP and the fact checking organizations. Facebook was blocking my video, and yeah, it was like my whole world changed at that point. The job that I'd had for a long time, for 12 years, told me to stop coming into work, and it was at the time it was really shocking and kind of, but you're sort of just on running on adrenaline and not really. I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to create this for myself, like this is going to happen to me. I had no idea what was kind of coming, but I'm so grateful for it because it's really what I needed. It's what needed to happen to me to make me really wake up to much bigger problems.
It is amazing. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight again, and given your experience with clinical trials, the, were you even with that in mind, were you sort of shocked at, well, either directly or indirectly, the power of the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, I I think what shocked me most, Charles, was just I thought we had I thought we lived in a country with free speech. And I know that sounds so naive. At the time, I really believed that I could say what I thought and there wouldn't be negative consequences in that way, that they would target my work and my reputation and everything else. And that's what really shocked me was thinking, oh, this is really controlled. And then later on, I found out that the Ministry of Health had been watching me for 6 months before they did anything. And the head of the medical council, the CEO, was talking to the Director General of Health. And these are incredibly powerful conversations about me and about my YouTube channel and the problem I was causing for them. And that shocked me too when I found that out later, that I thought, I'm just one individual. How can it be that I'm causing so many ripples? But it was very coordinated.
It's amazing, especially that the specific trigger for that was quite clearly a reference to a vaccine that, as far as anyone was aware by that point, didn't even exist. Was there further articulation on that point about that you should sort of undergo correct, with the suggestion that you might put out a different message, or was it just to do with taking it down? I mean, were you ever given the sense that you would there to at some point promote such a product?
No, it was really, this all came from that TV show Lawyer, was the that basically stop it and stop this. And I think they thought that they could quite quickly and easily, that I would just go away quietly, and they were, I think, surprised that I was not going to do that. Yeah, so, and at this point too, the medical council are asking me to sign a gag order and say that I can't make any videos on COVID-19. I can talk about anything else, but not COVID-19. And there was no way I was going to bend the knee to that, because it's like letting the camel in the tent, you don't you don't let them have anything. Otherwise, and look, I'm so grateful I did that, because most of the doctors that have gone through this process, at least in New Zealand, have signed that order because they thought that they had to. And whereas I knew straight away that this was only going to lead to very bad things.
Absolutely. Well, that's the right call for certainly for your burgeoning audience. I mean, thank goodness. But did they? specify why? Was it that you couldn't say anything, or was the inference that anything you were going to say was going to be negative or the wrong message? I mean, did they actually sort of spell that out?
Well, it was based on these complaints that I was, causing had the potential to cause public harm. And because my messaging was going against the government at that time, or still is, I guess, the one source of truth, they couldn't have it. That was the reason. And I mean, I didn't even anticipate that this is the way that they'd go. Like I thought, there's no way because the medical council they can control my license practicing as a doctor. And after that kind of happened, I was like, I can't be part of this. I can't be part of this corrupt medical system. It's terrible, and decided I'm not going to renew my license. Sort of, this is at the end of 2020. But before that, I thought they'd have no power to control my speech of what I'm doing in my private life. Essentially, it's not. But the problem with me was that I had by that stage a huge reach and a huge audience, and I was making them very nervous.
Yeah, evidently so. And you just mentioned the certificate to practice and then the register itself, because there was a development there, but I think the following year in 2021, what happened then with regard to the register?
In order to practice in New Zealand, at least, you're on the register, which means you're kind of on their list of doctors, and then you apply for a practicing certificate every year where you pay the fee to the medical council, and that allows you to prescribe and order, blood tests and so forth. So in 2021, I'm on the register, and I had a practicing certificate, but I was actually pregnant at that time, and I decided for various reasons as well that I don't want to do this anymore. And so my practicing certificate expired in May of 2021, and as soon as that happened, and I published another video on YouTube, then they said that I was practicing medicine without a license by making by publishing YouTube videos. And that's a criminal offence in New Zealand, that if you're practicing and seeing patients without being licensed, you can go, it's criminal. So that was when things really started heating up, because at that point I still had a lawyer, and they said this is very important that I fight this, because otherwise I will be, could be facing, serious, going to jail.
This is where we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of it and the way in which the book has been thrown at you via the incredibly worded legislation contained in the act that covers all of this, going back to I think 2003. And I'm just going to read now what happened a little bit later in August 2023 when a tribunal was convened. I don't want to jump ahead necessarily, but I think the audience just needs to understand what happened. And specifically, the tribunal convened and ordered cancellation of registration, not to apply for re-registration for 2 years from the date of the decision, censure, fine of $10,000, conditions on re-registration, and then payment of $148,450.41, amounting to 60% of the costs of the PCC investigation and hearing estimated costs. It is perfectly astonishing, I would say, to me, to anybody listening to what you've said so far, that could possibly be the result of any of this. But as I say, I have leapt ahead slightly, intentionally so, because how on earth did it get to that point? And to what extent were you involved in any of that?
I tried to go to deal with this, legally, I guess, with a lawyer. I had a QC that was helping me at that time, the Queen's Counsel, and I thought that this was legitimate, that I can fight this and say, because they were saying things like I was spreading misinformation, and I would ask, well, what is that? What is the misinformation? And they couldn't define it. because they don't know. It was going against what the government was saying that is deemed as misinformation. And so I tried to, under bad advice, I went to the High Court to try and stop this from happening because they were now saying that I was practicing without a license. And that didn't go in my favor. And after that, I realized that there was nothing I could do. They were going to take me to this disciplinary tribunal, and it really shocked me because I thought, what is this? I'm only telling the truth. I haven't been lying. There's no advantage for me doing this. But I felt very strongly that you need to speak up and say when you see something going that's wrong. And anyway, sort of leading into 2022, a few doctors had done this process of equity, which was completely new to me. And equity is the idea that if you haven't done any harm, it applies to all of us in common law jurisdictions. So New Zealand's one of them, England is another, obviously, is that with the principles of equity, I have no contract with them. They're trying to establish a trust with me and basically make themselves a beneficiary in order to get money off me, is essentially what the process is. And under the process of equity, I have no contract with them. So there was a doctor that basically was going through the process of being investigated in New Zealand, Dr. Manny Garcia, and he did this process, which is issuing them notices, and he was removed off the register. Like nothing was said. He was just taken off the register. And I talked to Manny and he said, Sam, you've got to go down this process. It's corrupt, the tribunal, the whole investigation. You can't go into their system. And so Manny convinced me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. And at the same time, Mark, my husband, who hasn't practiced as a doctor since 2016 by this point, he was being now investigated for doing an interview. And they're trying to prosecute him as well. And so he did this process of equity, never communicated with the medical council, and was again removed off the register. No information about this. Just you can see that he was taken off the medical register. And we knew about another 3 or 4 doctors that had done this. So for me, they didn't take me off, but I now realize it was because I was too much of a problem for them. They needed me as an example to other doctors. So the process went through to the tribunal, and I never engaged with them after sort of early 2022 because I realized that I can't win in this. It's literally a kangaroo court that they operate, and they determine the outcome before you've even started. I realize now that was as soon as I had the first complaint, it was already determined what was going to happen to me. In fact, and I will mention this because it affects the UK audience, but one thing that I found crazy was that there is a UK doctor who's currently practicing who made a complaint about me in that early time, who said that I was his treating doctor. And this complaint was upheld by the medical council as a legitimate complaint because there are different pathways that you can complain about a doctor. And this UK GP said that I was seeing him and that because he was watching my videos, he was choosing to. And this isn't held up as some delusion. This is accepted by the medical council. And this is how crazy it is. Like it's not, there's no connection with reality of what, is going on.
None whatsoever. And the act that I referred to is the Health Practitioners Competence Assurance Act of 2003. And for anyone who's put their head anywhere near any so-called public health legislation, they will know the sort of the tenor of it. And it is perfectly extraordinary. Corrupt is exactly the right word. I'm just going to read a little bit more from the results of the tribunal. And part of it, the charge summary, said that the PCC submitted that Section 93 does not require evidence of actual harm, but risk of serious harm posed by the charged conduct. And then they go on to say it was therefore submitted that the tribunal can be satisfied that Dr. Bailey's conduct poses a risk of serious harm to the public. So at the same time, they're saying that there's no need to provide evidence of such, but that the risk is still there. Now, from what I read, I don't think they even articulated what sort of harm they were imagining could be serious and potential. Did that ever actually come out?
No, it was essentially two expert witnesses that are highly compromised anyway because they work for the vaccine industry and the government, and said that on their opinion, that I was a had the potential of public harm, and they don't have to provide any data for this. They just state it, and that's accepted, and that's part of the costs because everything that they do is just like an open checkbook, which is eventually charged back to me. So if they decide to fly down these individuals to do the tribunal and stay in hotels and have meals and everything else, that's all just put on the Dr. Sam Bailey, you know, ticket there, and it's charged to the medical council, and then they pass it on to me as part of the costs. And it's literally it could be anything. There's no checking or anything of what should be done, what the costs are. It's completely arbitrary.
It is. I mean, well, I think it's more than that. I mean, it's a complete racket. In the back and forth we had before this, you phrased it very well. I thought you put it down as you being asked to pay for your own persecution, which is precisely what it is. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing. And just to go a bit further on the utter corruption, the threat of suspension was written down as such. Suspension will limit Dr. Bailey's ability to advertise herself as a doctor when she expresses harmful views. If, after suspension of registration, she continued to use the title doctor, she would likely commit an offence against Section 7 brackets 1 of the Act. Now, that piqued my curiosity because certainly in the United Kingdom it's totally customary for people to be referred to as doctor, regardless of whether they hold a medical doctorate or otherwise, regardless of whether they're practicing or retired. So I emailed the Medical Council of New Zealand and said, what's the form in terms of etiquette and procedure and whatever? And I got the reply back saying the title doctor is not a protected title under current legislation. As such, individuals who have retired from medical practice may choose to continue using the title doctor if they wish. This is common practice. So they are corrupting at every turn. This is quite clearly abusing the letter of the law as written down that they refer to in Section 1. I have, of course, looked at Section 1. There's absolutely nothing about that. So they are utterly moving the goalposts in order to catch you wherever it is you decide to go, or even if you don't necessarily do anything. What this does is it brings us to the medical council themselves, because, like you say, the law only allows them to fine of up to $30,000, but then they can increase by using the word costs, and therefore, in a sense, the sky's the limit. But where exactly does the Medical Council of New Zealand fit in terms of the sort of state architecture? How are they positioned and funded and the rest of it?
Yeah, so they are a body corporate and they are funded by medical practitioners. So medical practitioners pay the money every year in order so that the doctor can prescribe and so forth. So that's where their money comes from. But it also means that they're not, you can't do freedom of information requests about to them because they're a private body corporate. They're listed on the Dun and Bradfoot register, as a company. So there are 12 members of the Medical Council, and this used to be like an organisation that was for doctors, run by doctors. So it was there to try and, I guess, protect doctors, and now it's to protect the public, whatever that's supposed to mean. And they have 12 members, and 8 of them are chosen by the government of whatever. So they are clearly an agency that are controlled by the government to control doctors. Yeah. So there's no regulation of them. I don't, I've looked into that of who checks them. There is none.
Yeah, I mean, which seems absolutely astonishing on its own, but especially when you consider that they are able to set up a process by which they may recover costs that are in effect to their own benefit, either as a PR exercise or simply a financial one. On the PR side of it, obviously you are in New Zealand and across the world a public figure. You have, as you said, as you described previously, been on the television in your capacity as then a practicing doctor, subsequently on YouTube. You are well known to a lot of people who've looked into this and actually taken the time to try and work out what on earth is going on. How has this been reported elsewhere? Because clearly, you have put the word out. We're talking about it on a UK column interview. It seems from perhaps our side of the fence that there's a terrific potential for a backfire effect against the medical council. I mean, it seems to be an incredibly stupid thing for them to do because it draws attention to you and to what you're doing and will ask people to ask questions. But has there been a, a sort of a messaging attempt from them insofar as this is concerned?
I think what has been really interesting, like you say, is I can only comment on what I've seen in New Zealand in terms of because I've had recently, I've had a lot of smear attacks by the mainstream media, and 90% plus of people in the comment section are supporting me. And it was astonishing because most people that I talked to said, I've been reading, because I don't read them. I can't stand reading mainstream media, but we'll go through it and tell me that they could find one comment out of 100 and 200 comments and one's negative or something. So I know that the public are on my side, but also in terms of the medical council, there really are an ivory tower that are just in their own land of, I don't think they realize what is coming to them in terms of negative consequences just from the public. The messaging is for the doctors. This is what it's all about. Is I don't think the medical council necessarily care about the public, which is a foolish mistake in my in my opinion. But they are very worried about doctors doing the same as me and speaking out, and they're really clamping down. So recently there was a case of a doctor who spoke out because they were going to bring in McDonald's into a small kind of rural touristy town. And a doctor said that they didn't think it was a healthy choice, that they shouldn't be doing this. And the medical council were trying to censor this doctor for saying that. And you realize this is just escalating. I think the most important message really is for doctors is realizing that this is such a slippery slope that I know that it's bad for me, but really it's not bad for me because it doesn't change what I do. But I can see what is happening to doctors and how they are being very much funneled into a certain direction. And I foresee it as something terrible. But what the public see, which I think is great, is that they do not trust doctors and the medical system as such, like they did prior to 2020, because of everything that's happened.
That's absolutely right. Sorry, I realise as we go that there's one thing I haven't allowed you to make clear, which is that even if the fine was only for $5, your point in relation to all of this and your response, of course, is that this concerns the principle and not the amount of money. So to just give your view of your response to the demand for money.
Yes, so I'm not paying them anything. And I've had incredibly generous offers of people wanting to do GoFundMe and the crowdfunding sort of things. And I know I could probably raise that money easily, but I don't want to. I don't want anyone else's money, and I don't want my money to pay money to this corrupt. I mean, they're essentially like a terrorist organization. They operate out of fear, of instilling fear in people, and I will not do it. I will not submit to them.
Good for you. is what I say, and I'm sure absolutely everybody listening, and a lot of people will. This will be sent very, very far and wide, and people will absolutely say, "Good for you," and that is the principle. So anybody listening, don't reach under your mattress to pull something out to give Sam to fund a corrupt organization as part of a corrupt process. But instead, listen to the principle of the matter and to what she says about it. And this actually brings us on to the next point, which again, in terms of the law, the book that's being thrown at you, of course, this concerns, or the heart of this is free speech, and they they wrote from the charge detail. It's slightly lengthy, but I think it does bear reading. In relation to freedom of speech, the tribunal agrees that while the doctor may express an opinion on medical matters, professional standards require her to do so in a balanced way. The doctor's professional obligations constitute the justified limitation on the right to freedom of speech. The justified limitation on the right to freedom of speech. Health professionals must consider and assess evidence in a balanced manner, providing sufficient evidence from reputable sources, especially essential within the context of a public health response where the potential for harm is greater. I think those words are absolutely extraordinary. And if anybody can read those and think that that seems fine, there is a very, very big problem. What on earth do they mean when they talk about things being done in a balanced way?
Well, it was the same that happened with we back in April 2021 in New Zealand. All doctors, there was a statement, a guidance statement that was put out to all doctors, and in it it said when you're giving advice for patients about vaccination, you must promote the benefits of the vaccination. That was it. You couldn't talk about the negatives, only the benefits. And that where, again, they said in this document that you were expected as a medical practitioner to go and be vaccinated. So this was a statement that went out to all doctors. So it's very clear what they're signposting here and saying you must do this. Of course, this is absolutely ridiculous. The balanced reporting, I mean, I can give so many examples, and I'm sure you know the same in the UK of where there is only one source of truth in New Zealand about vaccination and health and what to do with the pandemic. You had to do what the government said or else. And it's just, I don't know, like I say, if they are so out of touch with reality that they think that this is legitimate or that they think that the hubris that they can get away with it. But of course, it's just, there's nothing, it's completely wrong.
Absolutely, it is. And I think what it does also is it brings to the fore the the vehicle that was used in order to have this explosion of messaging from it, whether it be in relation to vaccines or to behaviors or interventions or whatever they were called, restrictions. I mean, the list is very, very long, but all of this was predicated on the infectious disease model, in that if it couldn't be demonstrated or at least talked about that one person could make another person ill, then frankly, public health is to a large extent dead in the water. Now, you referred earlier on to your engagement with the book Virus Mania. The important point here is that this has led you into a way of thinking that certainly wasn't covered in any of your medical training, but does have such a great significance in the way that public health, as I say, is sort of propagandized and broadcast about. So just, I know it's a very, very big area, but in terms of evidence and absence of evidence, just give us a sort of an update on where this has taken you with regard to the idea of infectious disease being a spectre that should be feared.
That book that changed me, Virus Mania, I ended up by chance becoming a co-author. This is how I think God works, is that it gets you into an area that you need to go into. And so I became a co-author of that. They reached out to me and asked me if I'd interview one of the authors of the book, and I did. And then they asked me would I become a co-author, and subsequently it sparked my interest in really in Mark as well. My husband Mark, I have to give him a plug because he's incredibly smart man, and he has been always ahead of me in terms of the canary in the coal mine of realizing things. And then I catch up and go, oh my gosh, you're right, Mark, about this. And so we've dived deeply into pandemics, and for different people, it speaks to them and for on different for different reasons. And for me personally, what really convinced me was looking into the contagion experiments that were done in the Spanish flu era in 1918 and realizing that they couldn't make people sick with one of the reportedly most deadly viruses of our time, of our history. And so Mark and I have extensively researched numerous viruses and the background of virology. And what we do is we go to the foundational papers where a virus is said to be the and we unpack it and see, well, is that actually shown scientifically? And most of the time with virology, they don't do the basic scientific requirements for an experiment. So they don't do control studies, a control arm. They do essentially torture experiments a lot of the time on animals to prove that there is a virus. And we've got a wide range of videos on these subjects, and also Mark's written a technical paper on virology itself, which is about 28,000 words, which is freely accessible to anybody. Just for people that want to understand why we say what we say, it goes through it very logically and explains the science and background behind the fraud of virology. And it's important for us to, why I think this is so important is because most of us do things, especially in the last 5 years, we've seen that people do things out of fear. And fear of a virus is unnecessary. And you can live, for me personally, I found it a very empowering aspect to hold on to because it impacts your life and the way you live and be healthy, how to be healthy, what causes disease, and especially infectious diseases. And you can see in terms of one world government and the new world order that pandemics are one of the things that they're using to control people. I know there's lots of areas to this, but it's important that people understand that pandemics are not come out of a lab or come from bats jumping, into humans or anything. This is a fantasy construct that has no basis in scientific reality. And when you appreciate that, you don't fear germs and infectious diseases any longer. And for Mark and I, we've written another book called The Final Pandemic, which is again about what happened in COVID, and also it goes into lots of other different. It's like a mini version of Virus Mania for people that are interested in learning more.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said, it is an absolutely enormous topic, but I really would encourage people to get into that and understand what it is that they haven't been told. I think critically, but the sort of mainstream response to that and the conditioned response that people are sort of provoked into having is, well, but people still get ill, and people get ill at the same time and in the same place. And you've gone back to the sort of earlier part of the 20th century and looked particularly at the work of Ulrich Williams, and you have, I think, encapsulated all that isn't talked. I mean, you just talked about a doctor speaking out about against McDonald's and then being shut down. So the other side of it is, well, what are the other influences on our health? Just talk a bit about that, and indeed how in sort of modern society we are just pushed into a position where we're not even supposed to consider any other factors.
Yeah, of course. And Charles, I was in this camp, I was very orthodox and very much believed all of this until I looked into it myself. Like I said, it's an amazing transformation that I've had in the way we live, and you can see it with our own. I just say really quickly with our family, we're incredibly healthy. And people can't look at us, myself, my husband, our children, and say that we're not healthy because we are, and we have skin in the game with that, and that we want to live by what we say. So I think it's the understanding that when you talk to a doctor that they don't know anything about nutrition because it wasn't taught to them at medical school. And I know that we were taught about physiology and how pathways work with metabolism, but you don't know anything about nutrition or what to say to someone of what they should do. And it's all the basic things that our grandmothers knew, like having a good diet and exercise and sunlight and living in a way, in a positive way where you're around positive people and happiness and low stress and so it's all of the terrain. And I also like to explain the idea of terrain theory to people that are new to it is that if you're interested in plants, I love gardening. With plants, a plant doesn't just get sick randomly. Something usually happens to it. It's something wrong with the soil, too much water, too much light, not enough light, wind, and the makeup of the plant. Some are more resilient to others and can last a little bit longer, but eventually the bugs and everything come in to clean up when the plant is under stress. And that's the same thing that happens to us. We're surrounded by bacteria, microorganisms in us, on us. It's everywhere, and we shouldn't be afraid of it, that it's part of a process of healing that's used. And so many people talk about this extensively, historically and also currently, there's a way of looking at life where things don't just happen to us. Viruses don't just come out and jump on us and get us. It even when you say it like that, it doesn't make any sense because it doesn't actually happen that way. And what I found over the last few years is learning what really causes disease. And like you said, there's a book by an author he's deceased now, Dr. Ulrich Williams, that we brought back to understand the terrain and why we get sick and what you can do about it. And that book's called Terrain Therapy, that I've also been involved in.
Yeah, which I should say is absolutely fascinating, and I would definitely encourage people to have a look at that. But I think we've talked about free speech and the way in which the medical profession is used as part of the control grid by, in effect, subconsciously at least, fear mongering through this paradigm of the idea that people will make other people ill. And of course, the other thing that's being done very obviously is the creation of a very, very sort of stark divide between those that do believe the paradigm and those that are, classified as being, well, at least spreaders of harmful misinformation, or insane for suggesting that the mainstream virological paradigm is not actually the case. And that again seems willful because, of course, a lot of the terminology, let's say immunity, a weaker organism will, of course, be susceptible. It's just that the description of the mainstream is susceptible to something that's being passed from somebody else. Now, you have a two-way sort of street, as it were, with your audience. Are you getting the sense that there is a greater degree of knowledge being built up? I mean, obviously amongst those that do follow you, but are you finding people who are perhaps less likely to have been exposed to such thoughts now, shifting in their beliefs? Is there a ripple effect to all of this?
Absolutely. And I think what I've definitely witnessed, I mean, even since 2020, obviously the fear levels have dropped massively. And I think that's really important because people are far more likely to be open to things when they're not fearful to hearing it, for the first time. And what I found fascinating is just in some ways it's been cruel and horrid as well, but is most people that you talk to know someone that has been vaccine injured. At least this is the way it is in New Zealand. And so you can more easily talk to people about things or at least suggest things and they're open to it. And I think what I really find just positive, I guess, is to see people, the public are really onto it and really well educated and far more than I think the authorities give them any credit for. Like I think it's this is what was always thrown at me was that my audience are health illiterate and I'm misleading them because they're illiterate. And I thought, oh my gosh, if only they knew how clever the people are that I feel privileged that they will come and listen to me, versus others. But it's yeah, I definitely have seen a shift in the at least the last 5 years, and I think there are so many areas that you can tap into with people. It doesn't. It's not necessarily virology. I like I say, I don't find it extremely interesting or anything. It's a very boring subject, but it's been used to control us. And so I want to be an expert in this area so I know I will not be controlled. Yeah.
But that's the critical bit. This is designed very specifically and wielded as a tool of creating fear, or with which to create fear. And that clearly has a detrimental effect on your mental state, but I would say also your physical state. They're inextricably linked. There will be a percentage of people listening to this for whom a lot of these concepts are new or at least problematic because, like all of us, like you, particularly having been in the medical profession where this was stated as absolute rigid fact and there was no debate about it at all. Um, to go on that path of sort of eliminating fear from your life, but not having to spend the next 40 years reading into the literature, what sort of steps would you recommend to people to start to get their lives on the right track and to, to start to push that fear away?
It's a really good question. A person wrote to me recently, and I thought was really insightful, is that they said with anything with health, you have to have confidence in what you're doing, and that a lot of this comes down to your own testing and experimenting with yourself and getting confidence with that. And that has definitely been the case for myself, where what I used to believe that I'd need to take antibiotics for in a certain situation, I would myself not do that and see what would happen to me. And realizing, having confidence in that process that you are able to heal yourself and then, moving along next time doing something else a little bit more. And I think it is. Firstly, I always suggest to people that you need to know everything that you're putting in your body, and that's where your water comes from, where your food comes from, what is it, what are you eating. We're not very prescriptive with a certain diet, but it's just knowing what is in it, looking at the ingredients on packets and things like that. Just thinking about it, opening your mind and being in the moment for a second rather than passively doing things. Like think about it, where you're getting these things from. And I also encourage people to just test it with, say you're having your grandkids over or something and they're sick. Just see what happens. Just see, are you going to get sick? A lot of it is our own conditioning that we think we're going to get sick with being around them and sick children or whatever. And I know this myself with my own kids over this journey of seeing I'm not fearful of when a child has a runny nose or, that I might get sick. And part of it is actually just having faith that we are so much more robust than we are told. And yeah, and another thing I think that's always really important, and people identify this with this immediately, is knowing why do the big pharma and things do this? It's because there's billions, if not trillions of dollars involved. And this is involved with from the whole shebang, from diagnosis, testing, the all these different tests that people undergo now, and through to treatments and vaccines, and all the rest of it. It's realizing, follow the money of where this goes and that we don't need all this stuff to be healthy. It's we don't actually need that system. And if you want to start on this journey, look into it yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Look into it and experiment with yourself and see, and you'll get more confidence with time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a sound message. And again, you refer back to the pharmaceutical industry, and of course, absolutely a gigantic racket, and there is money to be made at every turn. But a lot of that is done by convincing people that the cause and effect is as they say it is. So you've just spoken about a runny nose, which of course to the majority of people is considered to be the illness itself rather than the expression of your body trying to deal with its current situation. So you take the drug and then you believe that that is what has made you better. So I think we live in a culture where we expect there to be a quick fix because we've taken something. But the quick fix is not really the right way to be thinking about anything, I don't think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Charles. It's not. And I think you deprive yourself of actually what true health is by thinking along those lines. It's, yeah, I mean, it's a huge area to unpack, but I think it's having inner confidence of knowing that you don't need, this is a sick system that we're dealing with. It's not a health system. And there's no incentive for them to help you. It's always about making you on the conveyor belt as part of that sick system. And we're conditioned from as soon as we're born, born in a hospital and die in a hospital. And it's sad, but all these traditions that have been lost of how to be well, and they're all the old stuff, the old school things that like my grandma used to say to me, and I used to think, oh yeah, do you really, is that really true? And now I sort of look back and think, oh my gosh, I wish I'd had a bit more time to talk to her about that.
Well, I think this is it. We're going to need to sort of wrap up quite soon, but talking to people is, of course, the most important aspect of all of this, and wherever possible in person. But it's very hard when one thinks like you do, and you have had that moment of discovering that things are not as you've been told that they were. It's very hard to consider being anything other than evangelical about it. And of course, that can have a terrifically detrimental effect because you can appear heavy-handed if you're trying to convince people that, in effect, you're right and they're wrong.
Yeah.
If I'm not suggesting there is a sort of magic bullet, but how would you recommend sort of going about beginning to communicate with people about this sort of thing?
I'm very much, I don't try and force things on people. I find that if people want to find me looking for the answers, that they'll find me, and I don't need to do any of the work. um yeah, so I'm always tentative because I know that it splits families apart. We've all seen this. It's been hideous of just how much the governments have split us into groups, and so that we can't even talk to each other any longer. I think that it really comes down to the person themselves, and I try and have a rapport with someone, and just make little suggestions of what do you think about it? What, does that make sense to you, sort of thing. And if it makes sense to them, then I won't go any further. But if they have questions and things, I'm like, well, just keep um, sort of chipping away. And I'm still to this day, Charles, like it's amazing the people that have only just found our work, and it blows me away that they, like I had a person that was part of had polio from when they were young, and had been part of a polio organization. And they recently found us and realized that what had happened was, she'd been poisoned with DDT when she was younger. And for most of her life, she'd believed that this was a virus. And it was someone smearing of me, like in the same group, and thought, well, this woman sounds like really bad, so I need to look and see what she's saying. So, it's amazing how people will find you that need to find you. And I just think you've got to scratch that itch and keep looking.
Absolutely. It really is. And I know a lot of people will want to do exactly this and to find where they can follow what you are doing, what you have been doing. So just tell us where, I mean, there is an absolute enormous trove of material that you have produced, and I know people want to go towards it. Where should people go to find more about what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I have my own website, which is probably the most reliable and accurate of everything, which is Dr. I won't give that up yet. Sam Bailey, Bailey.com. And if you follow on Substack, I have a Substack there as well. And so it's Dr. Sam Bailey .substack.com, and I'm on like I'm on YouTube. If you look up my name, you'll probably find me, and uh, various other, but there's sort of smaller, platforms like Odyssey and things. But I think for most of our work, if you can go to the website, and most of our content is available for free. We put the information out to the public because we think it's really important for people to learn and to know that it's not all what we're told, and there is another way to health.
Absolutely. Yeah, there certainly is. And all of what Sam just said and other things that have been referenced in the interview will be put into the notes. So no need to get the pencil and paper out to scribble all that down. It will be written down in the notes. Now, Sam Bailey, we have barely scratched the surface. We've covered a huge amount of ground nonetheless, and you are not going to be paying any corrupt organisations any money at all. So the audience have an awful lot to think about as they do go away in consideration of what you've said. But thank you so much for joining me, and I do hope you will come back and give us an update at some point in the future. Sam Bailey, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Charles. It's been such a pleasure.